And that's running. Okay, it is. And so I'm going to turn it over to the judges so that they can introduce themselves.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Mark Simons, and I'll introduce myself and then let my co-panelists introduce themselves. Then we'll ask you to introduce yourselves and we'll begin. I'm an attorney that practices law in the state of Nevada, and my selling point to you is keep doing what you're doing because you'll get paid money to do what you're doing. So you have a future doing this. So with that being said, I'll pass it off to the next judge.
Hello, I'm Charlie Hinderlighter. I was once a student in the We the People program, and this shaped my career path. But I'm always excited for the folks that don't do this at all, and they're like restaurant managers, but they always vote and are informed voters. That's awesome too. I'm a professional political nerd. I'm the director of government affairs for St. Louis Realtors in St. Louis, Missouri. I've taught political science, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Melton from New York. I want to make a plug for public service. That's where I've spent my career. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm currently the chief of staff for the Inspector General of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. That's the New York State agency that oversees the New York City subways and buses and the commuter rail system in the greater metropolitan New York City area. Prior to that, I worked for the federal government as the circuit executive. That's like the chief operating officer for the federal courts in the 3 states of New York, Vermont, and Connecticut, known as the Second Circuit. I'm looking forward to our conversation, and I'll turn it back to my fellow judges. And after you introduce, we'll ask you now to introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Okay, what we'd like you to do is introduce yourselves and your teacher now. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Samantha Lugo.
Hi, I'm Candace DeCuna.
Hello, I'm Jillian Kahn, and our teacher is Ms. Willits.
All right. Before I read the question, which will be Unit 1, Question 1, I want you to let you know, take a deep breath, show off, teach us what you know, and have fun. All right. The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Begin when ready.
Boom went the gunshot of Lexington and Concord, beginning the American Revolution.
A war for liberty and a war for freedom.
The Constitutional Convention and Bill of Rights included natural rights, limited government, and consent of the governed.
Britain violated colonists' rights as exposed through the Declaration of Independence. While Federalist number 84 argued that a Bill of Rights was unnecessary, Brutus number 84 successfully demanded to include a Bill of Rights in the Constitution to preserve limited government and protect citizens' rights. Britain maintained that virtual representation was sufficient, yet revolutionists argued that consent of the governed was non-existent.
The Constitution was coerced onto the people through secret conventions and a quick ratification. So it's ironic that it so heavily champions the principle of consent of the governed. Article 5 establishes the principle of consent through the amendment process. Whether an amendment be ratified through approval from both houses or from state legislatures, the people's voice is represented.
The Great Compromise affirmed that 2 senators would represent each state in the Senate and that proportional representation would be utilized in the House, ensuring state interest and citizen interest would be fairly represented.
When amending the Constitution, the principle of consent poses possible conflict. Although the government's legitimacy is only justified through the consent of the governed, the framers limited the people's power. Article 4, Section 4 proclaims the United States shall guarantee to every state a republican form of government. The founders prohibited direct democracy in favor of a representative democracy so that a majority tyranny was impossible. Plato decreed democracy could establish a totalitarian state and disturb natural rights.
The amendment process in Article 5 does not allow for the people to amend the Constitution. It requires action by elected legislatures. Thus, a government's control over an amendment does not satisfy public sovereignty. As long as politicians or ideologies are in power, popular amendments will not be ratified. In Federalist 10, But Madison argued that political factions prevent majority tyranny, yet they can also prevent progress. Although both houses approved the Equal Rights Amendment, an insufficient amount of states have ratified it because the Constitution requires consent of the governed. A supermajority is unlikely to be reached in modern times.
Revolutionary principles reverberate in modern America as Americans still lobby for natural rights, due process, and limited government. In 1913, the 17th Amendment mandated that state constituencies would directly elect their senators. In Jameson v. McClendon, Judge Reeves argued that qualified immunity permits law enforcement to break laws and violate citizens' constitutional rights to life and liberty without legal recourse. Due to the Black Lives Matter protests last summer, states like New York and Massachusetts revoked qualified immunity for police officers, upholding the revolutionary idea that all institutions must face legal consequences for their actions.
Furthermore, the 1980 Hyde Amendment promotes the idea of a limited federal government, as it prohibits federal funds from being used to pay for an abortion, with only few exceptions. Regarding abortions, both conservatives and liberals advocate for natural rights. Benjamin Rush stated, "Our citizens act a more absurd part when they cry out."
Since the dawn of our democracy, the Declaration of Independence acted as the promise, while the Constitution acts as the fulfillment.
I want to follow up on that Declaration of Independence concept. Now, the Declaration of Independence provided that the people could revolt if they felt there was tyranny. Now, are we experiencing revolt and revolution in current times? You referenced BLM and other current activities. If it's not revolution, what is it?
I would argue that we aren't necessarily experiencing a revolution because a revolution under the Declaration of Independence was, although justified, by a long trail of abuses. However, the Black Lives Matter protests aren't necessarily trying to overthrow the government. Rather, we've seen a pattern in history. When civil rights are prevented from a certain group, they protest, whether violently or peacefully. They're not trying to overthrow the government. They're trying to gain their rights that were already granted to them in our Constitution.
In addition, as seen with Texas v. White, the court explained that our union is indestructible and that there is no reason why a state would need to secede.
Furthermore, I actually concur with my teammates, but I also want to acknowledge that the Black Lives Matter protest is an echo of what has happened with Black Americans in our history. Black Americans have been fighting for their rights. They've been, ever since the Civil Rights Amendment, they've been fighting for their rights, especially during the Civil Rights Movement. So this Black Lives Matter movement that happened last summer is still an echoing revolutionary idea. So I believe that this is quite a revolution, just not one that is trying to overcome the government, just one that is trying to have the government hear their grievances.
Recently, Florida established a combating public disorder law, which would limit protesting when it got to an extreme violent level. And as seen within the Declaration of Independence, within their 10th grievance, they explained that their issue was that they had no right to protest. Whereas in society, we, through the First Amendment, have the right to protest. Therefore, our grievances are being heard.
A lot of what these protests have been about is qualified immunity. As seen in the case Pearson versus McCallahan, the major thing about qualified immunity, if the judge or jury deems a police officer's actions solely reasonable through that scenario, then that police officer is qualified to, or is granted that qualified immunity. So then they can't be sued and they can't be tried as long as their actions are reasonable. But because that term reasonable is so broad and can be interpreted in so many ways, oftentimes judges take that term and use it out of context. So a lot of police officers aren't necessarily being held accountable for their actions. And that's what the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to change.
All right, I want to have you guys help me reconcile a couple of statements in your prepared statement. You said the Declaration of Independence is the promise and the Constitution is the fulfillment. And you also said that the Constitution was coerced in secret and with speed. Help me understand the dichotomy there between those two statements.
So there's a great irony of America. We are all for freedom, yet during the Constitutional Convention, that was completely a secret. So there's a lot of irony. However, the reason that the Constitutional Convention was kept as a secret was so that a spread of misinformation wouldn't necessarily happen. But that's how America is. There's a balance between right and wrong, and we're attempting to reach that American goal of a perfect unity and a fair government, but we're striving to get there. America isn't perfect, but our purpose is to become more perfect.
When we think of American Revolution, we think of the date 1776 rather than 1787. And when 1776 comes into mind, we have declared our independence. Yet even with the Articles of Confederation, Americans continue to protest against this government with Shays Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion. So of course, with 87, we see that, yes, there was a secret convention. However, I'm going to go on the other hand and say that the Constitution was constructed, but then there was a phase of ratification. So instead of Washington going through up and down the 13 colonies saying, this is your new government, take it, there was this ratification process so that the colonies could agree to this new government. And I also believe that because we have taken a new government, we have consented, and that's why we have a dichotomy.
So how did the people consent to this Republican form of government that we have through the Constitution? You had a Constitution that was drafted in secret by elected officials. You have constitutional amendments that are not from the people, but by elected representatives. So there is this, as much as we talk about the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, there is this chasm, this little gulf between that. So help me understand how do you have consent of the governed when you don't have a popular government? We have a representational government.
Federalist 62 explains that unpredictable and arbitrary laws poisons our blessings and liberties within itself. So it's important to acknowledge that within our society, we are within a social contract that the government will maintain a rule of law. And we are able to see that through legislature. For example, within our Arizona Constitution, Section 8 provides for an initiative for citizens themselves to adhere to the consent of the governed and make an addition to our legislature.
So it's really interesting, our Republican form of government. And a lot of times, as seen through political science, voters act in the way of trustee delegate theory. We elect our politicians because we believe that they have the capability to make their decisions in the interest of us. Whether or not they actually do is entirely out of our control, but we trust in them because we elect them into office. We believe that they're going to do the best for their constituents. So yeah, we aren't being directly represented, but our actions and our morals and our beliefs are what we are hoping our elected officials are doing. And like my teammate had said, the referendum and the initiatives allowed in Arizona ensure that the people's voices are directly heard. But because of laboratories of democracy and other states, that might not necessarily be true. However, it's important to remember that federalism also plays a huge role into this.
Federalist number 10 brings into this idea of fractions and representation. So of course we have many different fractions in this great American society. We have many different people, so we need their voices and their opinions heard. However, there are far too many factions for this to be possible. So therefore we have representatives to serve as filters, to serve as people who serve to represent our government, and that's why we have a representative form of government.
All right, good job. Yay. All right, now it's time for feedback from the judges.
All right, way to go. Been waiting all day to get your chance. Asked you to show off and you did. So thank you for doing that, because it's enjoyable to dialogue and listen to your ideas once you, and we don't give you easy questions. We try to make you think and give us responses. I thought your prepared statement was, I loved the spin and the approach you took on it. And then you were able to back it up in our question answer session. And a couple times I got distracted by just listening to you and losing track that I was a judge and I'm supposed to be judging you. I was engaged with your ideas. I love your word choice. I like provocative words or words with color and flavor. And Candace, you kept using echoing of the revolutionary idea. I thought that was fantastic, because what that does is it leaves an imagery in my mind, and then that means your words stick. So I like how you guys use that, and you all did. You all used some very colorful, flavorful words. So it was very well done. I enjoyed it. Congratulations. Thank you.
I concur with my colleague. You guys did a nice job. You really set us up with an engaging and interesting opening statement that really covered a wide range. I really liked your notion of Federalists 10 that factions prevent tyranny, but they may also prevent progress. I liked the revolution reverberates and the notion that you guys had as you walk through some different issues through time. And you guys did a nice job. So I'm going to get a little nitpicky. Shays Rebellion and Whiskey Rebellion, once during the Articles, once during the Constitution. The Senate met in secret for years. Honestly, secrecy was not that uncommon. It was really just the anti-federalists wanted something to bash the Constitutional Convention about, so they threw that at it. I don't know that was really that big a deal, but you definitely caught our attention with that coercion comment there. But you guys really, I think in that last question, really did a nice job bringing in Federal 62, the notion of the social contract. I like that you were able to bring it to Arizona. Just a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Super job. I really, I thought you had powerful descriptive imagery in your use of language. You know, I still, that boom went I mean, it was just fabulous. And we were all there with you. We were right there with you at the foot of the bridge on the Commons, April 18th, 1775. We were there. You know, it was just great opening. I don't want to repeat. I thought I love the use of the Federalists. I thought your use of language, coercion, discussing, and I particularly, I'll echo what one of my colleagues said, particularly that idea that federal, you know, that from the Federalists, that both you have both progress, and yet you also have, you know, it's sort of it's yin and it's yang. I thought that was just really well done. So congratulations, great job. Best of luck in the rest of the competition. Super.
Yay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
So much.
I'm gonna
Thank
go ahead
you.
and
Care. Bye-bye. Great job.
Stop the recording.